Hi, and welcome back. So we move on to chapter 6. And in chapter 6, we are going to discuss, we're in section 2 now, negotiation subprocesses. In chapter 6, we're going to talk about perception, cognition, and emotion in the negotiation process. So I'm going to now share my screen. All right. So we're ready to get started. Define perception. Perception is the process by which individuals connect with their environment or to their environment. Now, negotiators are guided by perceptions of past situations and current attitudes and behaviors. The goal is to perceive and interpret with accuracy what the other party is saying and meaning. Perception is a sense-making process of interpreting the environment so as to respond appropriately. It is possible to process all information available to you, or it's impossible to process all the available information to you. As perceivers, we become selective, turning out some stimuli. Using perceptual shortcuts may come at the expense of accuracy. Perceptual distortion. In negotiation, a perceiver may create a perceived non-notion, really, about the other party. This may lead to biases and errors in perception and communication. Here we discuss 4 major perceptual areas: stereotyping, halo effects, selective perception, and projection. Stereotyping and halo effects, or distortion by generalization. Small bits of information are used to draw conclusions about individuals. Selective perception and projection involve anticipating certain attitudes and qualities in another person. The perceiver filters and distorts information to arrive at a predictable and consistent view of the other person. Stereotyping. One individual assigns attitudes to another solely on the basis of membership in a social or demographic category. A person is assigned to a group such as age, old, or young. A broad range of other characteristics of that group are assigned. Conclusion is from generalizations of the qualities, accurate or not, and we do this all the time on stereotyping. Once formed, stereotypes are highly resistant to change. And we've seen that through race relations, women, all of that. This has been a challenge for us. Perceptions is a challenge. So once formed, stereotypes are highly resistant to change. It creates a we and they mindset. People are more likely to resort to stereotyping due to time pressure, cognitive stress, and mood. Also, when conflicts involve values, ideologies, and direct competition. Halo effects. These occur when a person generalizes a variety of attributes based on knowledge of one attribute. May be positive or negative. Occurs when there is little experience with a person, the person is well known, or the qualities have moral implications. Halo effects and stereotyping are common hazards in negotiations. Negotiators form rapid impressions based on limited information. They tend to maintain these judgments as they get to know each other. Selective perception. A single perceiver signals out information that supports a prior prior belief, and filters out information that does not confirm the belief. This perpetuates stereotyping or halo effects. If an initial smile leads to the other to believe a person is honest, they may downplay any statement showing crafty intent. If the negotiator perceives the same smile as a smirk, the negotiator may downplay offers to establish an honest relationship. In both cases, the negotiator's biases may affect how the other party's behavior is perceived and interpreted. Projection. occurs when people assign to others the characteristics of feelings they possess themselves. Arises as a way to protect a person's own self-concept. Negotiators may assume the other party will respond in the same manner they would if positions were reversed. People respond differently to similar situations, so projecting your feelings onto the other negotiator may be incorrect. Projection may lead a negotiator to overestimate how much the other party knows about their preferences. So framing. Framing is a subjective mechanism people use to evaluate and make sense out of situations. Frames define a person, event, or process and separate it from the complex world around it. Due to differences, people frame things differently. Frames can change due to perspective, or they can change over time. In negotiation, disputes are open to interpretation, and the frame will likely affect perceptions and reactions. Frames reflect objectives, expectations, presentation, and evaluation. Again, framing reflects objectives, expectations, presentation, and evaluations. Frames are inevitable, often occurring without intention. So, substantial. What is the conflict about? The outcome, a predisposition to achieving a specific result or outcome. Common is distributive negotiation. Aspiration, a predisposition to satisfy a broad set of interests and needs, likely in integrative negotiations. Process, how the dispute is resolved. Identity, how parties define who they are. Characterizations, how a person defines others and loss or gain, how a person defines risk or reward of a particular outcome. Loss is the cost, value is the gain. So how do frames work in negotiations? Well, research is difficult to conduct, but linguistic analysis of negotiation transcripts provides some insights. So negotiators can use more than one frame, mix matches in frames between two parties or sources of conflict. Parties negotiate differently depending on the frame, and specific frames may be likely used to certain types of issues. Particular frames may lead to particular types of agreements, and parties are likely to assume a frame due to factors such as differences in values, personality, power, background, and social context. Another approach to frame interests and rights include rights and power are the views parties in a conflict are using one of three frames. Interests, they're using interests, rights, or power. Those are the three frames they're using. So under interest, negotiating positions are often due to underlying interests. Under right, who is right, who has legitimacy, and who is correct, or what is fair. And power usually imposes cost, economic pressure, expertise, authority, etc. People have a choice of how to approach a negotiation in terms of interests, rights, and power. The same negotiation framed differently will lead to different outcomes. Now, the frame changes as the negotiation does. It's important to consider patterns of change, transformation that occurs as parties communicate with each other. Naming occurs when parties label and characterize the problem. Blaming is next, and the parties determine who or what was the cause. Claiming occurs when a person with the problem takes action. Factors affecting how conversation and frames are shaped include negotiators tend to argue for stock issues. Each party tries to make the best possible case for their position. Frames may define shifts in negotiation, diagnose, formula, or detail. Multiple agenda items shape the issue's development. So reframing. Reframing is the process of changing the trust, tone, and focus of a conversation. shaping issues in several ways. Arguments attacking the significance of a problem or solution feasibility. The parties make a case on the logics of the needs or the positions, and management's interpretation of the issues on the negotiation agenda. Now, reframing is a dynamic process which occurring in a conversation as parties look for ways to reconcile perspectives. It may be done intentionally or emerge from the conversation. Either way, the parties often propose a new approach to a problem. So prescriptive advice: frame, shape what the parties define as key issues and how they talk about them. Ensure your preferred frames are acknowledged by others. Both parties have frames. Reframing from a match does not guarantee cooperation. Frames are controllable to some degree. You may shift the conversation toward the frame you prefer. Conversations transform frames into unpredictable ways. Track the shifts and understand where they were made, where they may lead. Certain frames are more likely to lead to certain outcomes. Recognition allows reframing to pursue constructive outcomes. So what about cognitive biases in negotiations? Well, we have examined how information is perceived, filtered, distorted, and framed. In this section, we examine how negotiators use information to make decisions during the negotiation. Systematic errors while processing information collectively labeled cognitive biases are many. Here, we will discuss a dozen cognitive biases of particular interest to a negotiator's performance. Irrational escalation of the commitment. Escalation of commitment is the tendency to make decisions that stick with a failing course of action. Repeated decision-making in the face of negative feedback, uncertainty of a goal attainment, and choice of continuing, due in part to biases in individual perception and judgment. Desire for consistency and saving face prevents change. Overconfidence is another factor that can drive escalation, most likely with a public decision rather than one made in private. One way to combat these tendencies is to have an advisor serve as a reality check. So mythical fixed pie beliefs. Many negotiators believe negotiations involve a fixed pie. They assume integrative settlements are not possible and so do not search for them. Tendency to see a fixed pie varies depending on how people fix the nature of a given conflict situation. Time constraints or culturally values may vary fixed pie beliefs. We previously looked at minimizing fixed pie belief through procedures for inventing options. Now, two more approaches. By focusing on underlying interests, you are more likely to see that your fixed pie perceptions is misguided. As hold negotiators accountable. Also, we need to hold negotiators accountable for the way they negotiate. So what about anchoring and adjustment? This is related to the effect of the standard or anchor against which further adjustments are made during negotiations. So anchors can become a trap if the choice of an anchor is based on faulty or incomplete information and becomes misleading in itself. Once defined, both parties tend to treat anchors as a valid benchmark by which to adjust other judgments. Goals in negotiation can serve as anchors, may be visible or invisible, conscious or unconscious. Preparation and the use of a reality check helps prevent errors of anchoring and adjustment. Issues in framing and risk. Frames lead people to seek, avoid, or be neutral about risk. The tendency to seek or avoid risk may be based on reference point against which offers concessions or judge. The number you use to evaluate negotiation progress and success. Keep two things in mind about the effect of frames on risk. Negotiators are not usually indifferent to risk. but they should not trust their intuitions regarding it. Risk-averse negotiators are apt to accept any viable offer, while risk seekers will wait for a better offer. Remedies include awareness, information, analysis, and reality checks. Availability of information. Be concerned with the potential biases caused by availability of information or how easily it is retrieved. How easily it can be recalled and used to inform or evaluate a process. This also affects negotiations through the use of established search patterns, meaning without proper planning, a negotiator may become overwhelmed by the biases and lose the benefits through of thorough analysis. The remedy is clear. Do not assume the first information is complete or best, and that's with anything that we task with. So the winner's curse. When negotiation ends quickly, a negotiator may feel discomfort about a win that comes too easily. I could have done better. This may stem from counterfactual thought processes, which entertain the possibility of what may have been. The easier it is to imagine a better alternative, the less satisfied the negotiator would be. This can also affect future negotiating behavior. The best remedy is to prevent it from occurring. Advanced planning helps a negotiator avoid making an offer that is unexpectedly accepted. So, overconfidence. This is the tendency to believe your ability to be correct is greater than it actually is true, with a double-edged effect. It can solidify the degree to which negotiators support positions or options that are incorrect or inappropriate. Negotiators may discount the validity of the judgments of others, shutting out the information needed for integrative solutions. Overconfidence can lead to escalation of commitment. Do not suppress confidence or optimism. Avoid overconfidence in anything. The law of small numbers. Now, people really tend to draw conclusions from small sample sizes. In negotiation, this applies to the way negotiators learn and extrapolate from their own experiences. This often leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. Styles and strategies that work in the past may not in the future. An example is the hot hand fallacy. The incorrect belief a streak of events is due to momentum and will continue. No evidence supports the presence of hot hand streaks in sports. Self-serving biases. People often explain their behavior and others' behavior by making attributes either to the person or the situation, tending to overestimate the causal role of personal factors and underestimate the causal role of situational factors, known as the fundamental attribution error. The actor-observer effect worsens the bias as people attribute their own behavior to situation factors and others to personal factors. Self-serving bias may distort evaluation of the information. The false consensus effect overestimates the support a position has. The base rate fallacy ignores relevant information for non-relevant. Assuming our own beliefs are based on credible information or opposing beliefs are based on misinformation. Endowment effect. This is a tendency to overvalue something you own or believe you possess. This is likely tied to loss aversion. The owner frames the sale of an item as a loss and assigns a higher value than a buyer does. In negotiation, this can lead to inflated estimations of value that interfere with reaching a good deal. Seen as an inflated personal attachment to status quo, a similar process occurs when an accepted offer is liked more than a negotiator's own proposals. To reduce disconsonates, add subjective value to the outcome. So ignoring others' cognitions. Failure to consider others' cognitions allows negotiators to simplify their thinking about complex processes. This usually leads to a disruptive strategy. In contrast, when considering the other party's viewpoint, a capacity known as perspective taking, the risk of impasse is reduced. The chances of achieving integrative outcomes through log rolling increases. The drive to ignore others' cognitions is deep-seated. It can be avoided only if negotiators focus on forming an accurate understanding of the other party's interests, goals, and perspectives. So, reactive devaluation. This is a process of devaluing the other party's concessions simply because the other party made them. This leads negotiations to A, minimize the magnitude of the concession made by a disliked other, B, reduce their willingness to respond with a concession of equal size, and C, or seeks even more from the other party once a concession is made. Now let's look at reactive devaluation that may be minimized by the following. A, it could maintain an objective view of the process or have someone else do so. It can clarify each side's preferences and concessions before they are made. Or C, it could use a third party to mediate or filter concession-making processes. So managing misperceptions and cognitiveness. These typically arise out of conscious awareness as negotiators gather and process information. The result can be over-reliance on faulty assumptions and data. The first level of managing distortions is awareness. Reframing is potentially an effective remedy. Telling people about biases do not make them go away. One avenue involves the intervention of outside parties. During mediation, negotiators were less susceptible to judgment bias and perceived the process as a more value-creating fair. So mode, emotions, and negotiations. Now, as we close out this chapter, in research, negotiations are portrayed as rational beings, calculating and calm and in control. Now, overlooking the role played by emotions in the negotiation process, the distinction between mood and emotion is based on specificity, intensity, duration. Mood states are more diffuse, less intense, and more enduring than emotion states, which are more intense and directed at specific targets. Negotiation creates both positive and negative emotions. Positive emotions are termed happiness, while negative emotions may stem from dejection or aggregation. Positive emotions may have positive outcomes for negotiations, more flexibility and concession making, and less hostility. Aspects of the negotiation process can lead to positive emotions, fair proceedings, and favorable social comparisons. Negative emotions may have negative negotiation outcomes. Now, not all negative emotions have the same effect. Aspects of negotiation process can lead to negative emotions. They may stem from a competitive mindset. Positive feelings may have negative consequences, and negative feelings may create positive outcomes. Negative emotions can sometimes benefit the negotiator. Emotions can be used strategically as negotiations gamuts. Negotiators may manipulate emotions to get the other side to adopt certain beliefs or take certain actions. There are ethical implications using contrived emotions. And that's it for chapter 6. Thank you guys for joining me for chapter 6 as we review chapter 6 at a top level overview. Please read chapter 6 and answer any questions that you may have, or jot down any questions you may have, and let's discuss them during coffee and conversation. I'll also see you in the discussion post. Take care.